My name is Maya Hart, and the night my family threw a backyard party for my grandfather's 90th. My husband leaned toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Grab your bag. We're leaving. Don't make a scene." The fairy lights along the maple trees hummed. The Bluetooth speaker crooned something cheerful, and a neighbor's kid chased bubbles across the lawn. I held a flute of Prosecco I hadn't tasted. I thought Ethan was being dramatic until he took my elbow like we were about to waltz and steered me toward the side gate. He didn't look at me again until we were in the car. The doors clicked shut, and the quiet wrapped around us like a dark coat. He set both hands on the wheel the way he does when he's making himself say something I won't want to hear. "That's not your grandfather," he said. Heat rushed up my neck. I laughed once, a small wrong sound that fogged the windshield. "What are you talking about?" He waved. He didn't wave. He didn't look at you. "And the ears are wrong." "The ears?" It came out sharp, almost a hiss. "You know how I am with faces," he said, voice steady, almost gentle. "Cartilage doesn't lie. The helix on the right curls tight on your grandfather. That man's is loose and flat. The lobes attached on your grandfather. That man's hangs." He swallowed. "Maya, we need to go." In the mirror, the backyard glowed like a postcard. My mother's laugh carried through the hedge. A cousin I barely remembered held a cake knife like a conductor's baton. My chest tightened until I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I wanted to open the door and run back, demand a closer look, demand anything, because disbelief is so much easier than fear. I pressed my palm to the dash and felt the engine ticking. "If you're wrong," I said, "I'll never hear the end of it. If I'm wrong, we apologize and go home," he said. "If I'm right, we call the police." He reached across and locked the doors. The sound was soft, almost polite. It still felt like a siren. "Say..." Ethan kept his hands on the wheel, steady but white-knuckled, while I tried to breathe through the thudding in my chest. The party was still humming behind us, faint laughter and clinking glasses muffled by the closed windows. It should have been comforting background noise, a reminder that everything was fine. Instead, it sounded like a celebration held on the wrong planet. I turned toward him, desperate to read his face. "You can't just say something like that and expect me to swallow it. You're telling me my own grandfather isn't the man they wheeled out?" he finished. His voice didn't waver, and that scared me more than shouting ever could. "I'm not guessing, Maya." "I know." I wanted to argue, to shut him down, but the words tangled. Because somewhere in my gut, even before he spoke, I had felt it too. When they rolled my grandfather into the yard, I'd waved like a child trying to get his attention. He hadn't blinked. He hadn't even flinched. He just sat there, hands folded like prop's eyes, fixed on something above our heads. I told myself it was age or frailty or maybe the medication he'd been on. But Ethan had turned rigid beside me, and the longer I tried to dismiss it, the more wrong it felt. "You remember faces?" I whispered, almost accusing. "That stupid trick where you can describe a stranger from 10 years ago." "It's not a trick," he said, and finally looked at me. His eyes were dark, unflinching. "It's my job, and it's my curse. I don't forget. And that man, Maya, that man isn't him." I leaned back against the seat, pressing my nails into my palms until they left crescents. Images started to surface, uninvited, my grandfather kneeling on the workshop floor to show me how to plane a block of cedar, his hands smelling of sawdust and peppermint tea. The way his letters had arrived at college, folded neatly, with a check tucked inside just enough to cover groceries, rent the occasional breakdown. He never signed them with more than 3 words. "Hope this helps. Proud of you." No lecture, no strings. He had been the only one who made me feel like I belonged. I thought of the last time we spoke face-to-face, a shaky video call 3 years ago. He'd teased me about squirrels stealing tomatoes from his garden. His laugh had carried through the screen, fragile but alive. After that, my mother always said he was too tired, too sick, too asleep, and I let myself believe it. Now Ethan's certainty was prying the lid off every doubt I'd buried. My throat burned with the question I didn't want to ask. If that isn't him, then where is he? Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. That's exactly what we're going to find out. The words hung heavy in the car, thicker than the late summer air. I reached for the door handle, not to open it, just to feel the cool metal beneath my hand. It grounded me barely. Somewhere inside, the denial cracked and fear slipped through. The phone felt heavier than it should have when I pulled it from my bag. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling as if the simple act of dialing 3 numbers could snap the world in half. Ethan didn't rush me. He just kept staring out the windshield, jaw tight, as if he'd already committed to whatever storm I was about to summon. I whispered, "If I'm wrong, they'll never forgive me." He turned his head slowly, eyes steady on mine. "And if you're right, then you'll save him, or at least save the truth about him." The conviction in his voice carried me through the hesitation. I dialed. The ring was short. A calm operator answered, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. I told her there was a man at my family's party, who I believed was impersonating my grandfather. Saying the words aloud felt like stepping off a cliff. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss me. She asked for the address, then assured me help was on the way. When I hung up, the air inside the car pressed down like a weight. Ethan reached across, squeezed my hand once, then let go. The silence stretched until I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A plain sedan pulled up, not flashing lights or sirens, just quiet authority. 2 officers stepped out, dressed in plain clothes. Their calmness made the dread sharper. They leaned into my window first. One asked for my name, the other listened without blinking as I repeated the story. Their expression gave nothing away. Finally, they nodded, thanked me, and walked through the gate as if they were delivering a package. From the car, I watched the backyard shift almost imperceptibly. Music still played, laughter still rose, but shoulders stiffened. Conversations broke mid-sentence. My mother's bright voice faltered, then rose again sharper like brittle glass. She was talking fast, gesturing her wine glass tilting dangerously in her hand. My stepfather stood apart staring at the hedge, as though it might offer him a way out. The officers moved with a practiced stillness. They spoke to my mother, then to others, then finally approached the man into the wheelchair. From this distance, I couldn't hear, but I saw the tilt of his head, the unmoving set of his mouth. When one officer asked for identification, my mother disappeared into the house and returned with a folder. Papers were handed over. Whatever she offered didn't convince them. I pressed my forehead against the glass, my breath fogging a small circle. For a long moment, everything looked frozen, until one officer knelt by the wheelchair, spoke quietly, and waited. The man nodded, lips moving once. The officers straightened. One walked toward the driveway. My stomach clenched, expecting him to come to our car. He didn't. He simply paused, scanned the yard, then disappeared back inside the house. I couldn't stop the thought circling in my mind, louder with every heartbeat. If that man isn't my grandfather, then where has he been these past 3 years? The answer was coming, but not tonight. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee, the kind of place that tried hard to be clean, but could never wash away years of strangers passing through. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, staring at the floral spread as if the pattern could anchor me. Ethan paced near the window, pulling the curtain aside every few minutes to check the parking lot. Neither of us said much. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was the silence of 2 people clinging to opposite edges of the same cliff. When my phone rang, the sound sliced through the air so sharply I jumped. The caller ID glowed with my mother's name. My throat tightened. Ethan motioned for me to answer, but my hand shook as I swiped the screen. Her voice came out like broken glass, sharp, furious, already wet with tears. "How could you? You called the police on us. On your own family. Do you know what you've done?" I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. "Mom, listen. You think you're better than us. Because you ran off to Boston. Because you married someone who thinks he knows everything. You humiliated us tonight. You don't understand. You weren't here these last years. You don't know what it's been like." Her words tumbled over each other fast panicked. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, as though closeness could help me catch some truth hidden in the rage. "Then tell me," I said, my voice breaking. "Where is he? Where's Grandpa Silence? For a long moment, I thought the line had dropped. Then her voice came back, low and cold. You don't get to ask that. Not anymore. Not after tonight. The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen, my hand numb. Ethan crossed the room and pulled the phone gently from my fingers. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, hollowed out. Morning came gray and heavy. A knock rattled the door. My stomach flipped when I opened it to find the same two officers from the night before. They didn't push inside, didn't flash badges. They spoke quietly, as if they knew they were about to break something fragile. There's been a statement one said. Your family reports that Mr. Hale passed away in March of 2020. They say it was natural causes. The body was privately buried. My knees gave, and I sank back onto the bed. The words hovered above me like a swarm of bees I couldn't escape. 3 years. 3 years I'd been sending birthday cards. 3 years I'd begged for phone calls and been told he was too tired, too sick, too asleep. 3 years believing he was alive somewhere in that house when he wasn't. We're treating this as an open investigation. The officer continued, his voice distant, now muffled by the roar in my head. Until the coroner confirms, we can't close anything. Ethan's hand found mine, grounding me. The only thought left in my mind pounded like a drumbeat. They let me mourn a lie. They let me love a ghost. And if my grandfather had been gone all this time, then everything else, the party, the wheelchair, the smiling guests, was nothing but theater. The days blurred together after the motel. Reporters sniffed around the story once the first shaky phone video leaked online. My mother standing beside a man in a wheelchair who wasn't my grandfather, raising a glass with tears on her cheeks. The clip spread faster than I could blink, strangers dissecting every frame, inventing theories. I stopped checking my phone. Shame and grief pressed so hard on my chest, it felt like I was walking underwater. Then one evening, the call came. Not from family, not from the police. From a woman with a clear, steady voice who introduced herself as Elena Alvarez, my grandfather's attorney. I've been trying to reach you for some time, she said. Your grandfather's estate was placed in trust, and you are the sole beneficiary. Her words landed like stones. Beneficiary? I asked, half expecting her to correct herself. Yes, Ms. Hart. The house in Hudson Valley, the woodworking shop, the accounts. Everything he owned was left to you. He discussed it with your mother and sister years ago. My throat went dry. Suddenly, all the evasions, the blocked calls, the strange secrecy fell into place. They hadn't just hidden his death. They'd hidden it from me because acknowledging it meant surrendering everything he had built. I hung up and sat very still, staring at the cracked line in the motel's ceiling plaster. Ethan reached for my shoulder, but I was already dialing again. My mother answered on the second ring, voice sharp with fury. How dare you, she spat. You dragged our name through the mud, made us into a spectacle. You have no idea what you've done. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice level. Grandpa left it to me. All of it. You knew. You hid it. She let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. We protected him. We protected you. He didn't want a fuss, didn't want to be paraded around. We gave him peace, Amim. You didn't protect him, I snapped. You looted him. You turned his life into a cover-up so you could keep living in his house, spending his money pretending I didn't exist. Her silence cut deeper than her words. For a moment, I thought she might finally break, admit something, anything. Instead, she exhaled through her nose and said coldly, You walked away from this family years ago. You don't get to swoop back in and act like some savior. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. Where is he buried? She didn't answer. The line went dead. I sat trembling, the dial tone humming in my ear. The betrayal had teeth now sharp and undeniable. And if my family thought silence would protect them, they were wrong. Because the truth wasn't finished coming. The investigation unfolded slowly at first, then all at once like a dam giving way. Detectives from the county sheriff's office visited the motel more than once, notebooks open, pens scratching across the pages as they asked the same questions again and again. Every time I repeated the story, it felt stranger to hear it in my own voice, that my family had thrown a birthday party for a man who had been dead for 3 years. the district attorney's office announced an inquiry into possible fraud and identity deception. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones flashing, asking how an entire family could hide a death that long. I avoided them, ducking my head beneath Ethan's arm whenever we had to walk past the crowd. It was surreal hearing my last name thrown around on the evening news like it belonged to someone else. When the charges finally came down, they weren't dramatic. No television-worthy trial, no handcuffs or orange jumpsuits. My mother's stepfather and sister were cited for failure to report a death withholding information and misuse of funds. My uncle Patrick, who admitted he had played the role of my grandfather with glasses and a false beard, was charged separately for impersonation, but agreed to cooperate. None of them saw the side of a jail cell. The judge handed down probation, stern warnings, and the threat of prison if they slipped again. It should have enraged me, and part of it did, but another part of me was exhausted, too hollow to want vengeance. Justice, in its measured, bureaucratic way, had spoken. The world knew the truth now. That was something. The coroner's report came last. Grandpa Russell Hale had died in his sleep. No trauma, no foul play, no poison. Just an old man's heart finally slowing down. I read the report alone, sitting at the tiny desk in the motel room, tears blurring the printed words. For the first time in years, I let myself grieve without doubt. I cried for the tomatoes he'd joked about, for the folded checks he sent when I was drowning, for the voice that had always made me feel less alone. When I finally looked up, Ethan was in the doorway watching me quietly. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand, embarrassed by the mess of it all. At least now I know, I whispered. At least I can say goodbye. He stepped forward and rested his hands on my shoulders. And now you can decide what comes next. The words settled over me like a challenge. The fraud had been exposed, the legal process had run its course. But the real confrontation, the one with memory, with family, with the house that had never felt like mine, was still waiting. And soon, whether I was ready or not, I would have to walk back through its doors. The house stood at the end of a gravel drive lined with maples, their leaves just starting to bronze with early fall. When the probate court finalized the transfer, a deputy from the sheriff's office accompanied me to the property. It wasn't dramatic, no eviction squad, no shouting, just a quiet formality. My family had already left. The windows were dark, the front lawn overgrown in patches, as though the place itself had held its breath waiting for me. Inside, the air was musty but familiar. The faint scent of polish clung to the woodwork, the same polish my grandfather had used on his furniture for decades. On the kitchen counter sat a folded note, my mother's handwriting, neat and sharp. "You've always been good at taking what you didn't earn." I stared at the paper for a long moment before striking a match and watching it curl into ash in the sink. Ethan walked the rooms with me, testing light switches, opening curtains. It felt intrusive, like moving through a stranger's life, even though I had once spent whole summers here. The photos on the walls had been stripped away, only faint outlines remained where frames had hung. The emptiness should have been a relief, but instead, it pressed down heavier than if the rooms were still crowded with their laughter. The workshop out back was different. The door groaned, the hinges stubborn, but when it opened, the smell of cedar and dust hit me so hard I had to close my eyes. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, catching on the curve of half-finished chair legs, stacks of planed boards, jars of nails, arranged in the order he liked. On his workbench lay a small wooden box, smooth and simple. Inside was a folded slip of paper in his shaky scrawl. "When the house feels too quiet, fill it with your own noise. Don't let silence trick you into thinking you don't belong." The words undid me. I sank onto the stool, clutching the note, sobs shaking free after years of holding them in. For the first time since his death became real, I wasn't just mourning, I was being reminded that I was wanted. In the weeks that followed, I planned a memorial. Not the staged birthday my family had arranged, but a gathering of truth. I called the local church, reached out to neighbors, invited the men who had worked beside him in the shop. We stood in the yard under strings of soft lights, drinking coffee instead of champagne, and told stories. One man remembered how Russell taught him to carve dovetail joints. A neighbor laughed about the time Grandpa chased raccoons out of the garden with nothing but a broom. Each memory stitched him back into the world, not as an illusion in a wheelchair, but as the man he truly was. I paid for the service, myself kept the receipts, and later filed them with the estate. It was the most practical grief I'd ever experienced, balancing checkbooks while swallowing tears, but it felt right. My family didn't attend. I didn't expect them to. Their absence was a shadow, but not a surprise. When the last guest left and the night fell quiet, I carried a bottle of wine to the living room. I sat in his chair, its cushions worn to the shape of his shoulders. The house hummed with silence, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was waiting. I poured a glass, set my feet on the low table, and let the weight of the past months sink in. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was a strange, steady calm, as if the house itself had finally recognized me. For once, I wasn't the outsider peeking in from the cold. I was home even if it had cost me everything else to claim it. The truth hadn't brought my grandfather back, but it had given me the chance to grieve him honestly, to honor him without disguise, and to live in the space he built with his own hands. And as the night deepened around me, I understood what his note meant. The silence wasn't empty. It was an invitation. So I lifted my glass and whispered into the stillness, "I'm here, Grandpa. I'm not leaving again." Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.